and obviously everyone not in the pilot stays on the legacy system as it presently runs.
Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One important way for people on UC to build their financial resilience is through regular saving, although that can feel incredibly difficult for people on low incomes. So does the Minister agree that the government's Help to Save scheme, precisely for people on tax credits and UC, which provide a 50% bonus on their savings, is a really important tool?
Well, I met only today with organisations like Toynbee Hall and other organisations who are championing the idea of Help to Save, and that is making a massive difference. That linked to automatic enrolment, that linked to various other schemes that we are trying to pioneer to ensure that there is savings that are there as well as the universal credit.
Michael Tomlinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I visited my local job centre, and they are very positive about the effects of universal credit, but specifically in relation to financial resilience. How many people have been helped into work and the security of a regular pay packet as a result of universal credit?
Minister.
Well, my honourable friend makes a very, very good point that hundreds of thousands of people have been helped into work. But more particularly, it is the difference between the present system and the legacy system. We now have a dedicated work coach. We have personalised support. We have scrapped the 16-hour cliff edge. There's more help with childcare. And there's given additional support that was never there under the legacy system.
Rachel Maskell.
Mr. Speaker, a young constituent couldn't afford to go to his universal credit appointment, was sanctioned, then lost his home in York's resettlement project and ended up on the streets. When we were told that the government would fix the problems with universal credit as it was being rolled out, why hasn't the government stuck to this commitment?
Minister.
Well, if the individual case is sent to the Minister in respect of universal credit, they will take that up and respond accordingly.
Mr. Speaker, if people are paid on a 4-week cycle, once every year they get paid twice in the same month. This disrupts the universal credit payment for 2 months. Would the Minister meet me to see what we can do to prevent these cash flow issues happening?
Minister.
Well, I take the point that my honourable friend raises in his usual astute way, and I know that the Minister concerned would be happy to meet with my honourable friend.
Ruth George.
I have several constituents who have been victims of universal credit fraudsters, to which I have written to the ministers about on several occasions. I've now received a response to say that only where there is clear evidence that they had no involvement in a claim will the department consider reinstating legacy benefits and consider repaying the advance that was made to them. The claimants are being asked to an interview under caution, which is incredibly intimidating, and they have no access to legal advice and support for that. What is the department going to do to stop intimidating such victims?
Minister.
Well, the honourable lady, as I discussed earlier before question starts, knows that I'm about to write to her in great detail on those particular points, but the individual issue is being addressed so that there is a much gentler way forward, and it is very much the case that we are reforming the way that advances are made so that there is no fraud involved in the particular process.
Heidi Allen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hope the Minister will forgive me. I was hoping to address the question to the new Secretary of State. I'd be interested to know what she's learnt so far about the 5-week wait and the damage it does. People have more debt when they come onto universal credit than they did on legacy benefits. And the advance payment is another debt that must be repaid from very meagre 3-year benefit frozen benefit amount. When is the Secretary going to State look at getting rid of that 5-week wait so people get non-repayable money more swiftly into their pockets? They can't wait 5 weeks.
Minister.
Well, I'm sure the Secretary of State looks forward to appearing in front of the Select Committee in front of the Honourable Lady next week. But I can certainly respond by saying that there is a advance that is available in the usual way, and we have brought in the Money and Pension Service, which was supported by the select committees, both Treasury and Work and Pensions, to provide debt advice and support on budgeting for claimants. And there is no doubt that the extra money for help to claim, which is administered by trusted providers, whether it is the Citizen Advice Bureau or Citizen Advice Scotland, is very much helping in the process going forward.
O'Hara.
As my honourable friend from Glasgow North said, this is Challenge Poverty Week in Scotland, and there will be 400 events will take place to highlight the reality of living in poverty. Because one of the most significant push factors in taking people into poverty has been the 5-week waiting time between applying for and receiving universal credit. Today there are 750,000 households who are unable to cover their outgoings during those 5 weeks and are trying to repay their universal credit advance. We know it, the public knows it, I suspect his department knows it. When will he do something about it?
Well, he will understand that this is an assessment period, that no one has to wait to receive a UC payment, and on migration there will be a 2-week run-on for both housing benefit and employment support benefits.
One more. Brendan O'Hara.
Speaker, as part of Scotland's Challenge Poverty Week, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation published a report that shows that the actions taken by the Scottish Government, such as building 87,000 affordable homes and introducing specific child poverty legislation, is making a real difference in tackling poverty. Given that there is at least one government on these islands determined to tackle the scourge of poverty in our society, isn't it time for social security to be fully devolved to the Scottish Parliament?
Well, there is much that I could say about the Scottish Government and their approach to welfare, but I will pass on that for the present purposes. The short point is surely this, though, that this is a government that has introduced childcare changes, that has introduced more employment, that has introduced support on an ongoing basis, whether it is lower taxes, and it is obviously the case that there is a benefit by way of the changes and advances that we've made.
Tamanjeet Singh Desi.
Number 5, please, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, since 2010, there are over 3.7 million more people in work and 730,000 fewer children growing up in workless households. About 3/4 of employment growth have been in full-time work, which has been proven to substantially reduce the risk of poverty. But it isn't enough to have any job, Mr. Speaker. We want people to have good jobs.
Tamanjeet Singh Desi.
Mr. Speaker, with regards to in-work poverty, 20% of people in relative poverty in 2016-17 were single people without children and 11% were couples without children. The government has done absolutely nothing to reverse cuts to work allowances for people without children who do not have a disability. So what action is the Minister going to take to tackle in-work poverty amongst those people?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I totally disagree with the comments the Honourable Member just made. We are committed to helping lone parents into a job which fits around their caring responsibilities, and there are now over 1.2 million lone parents in work. And to support parents into work, this government, Mr. Speaker, spends £6 billion on childcare each and every year.
That's really kind of you to think of that.
Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Has the Minister read the report from the Resolution Foundation that states that low pay is falling for the first time in 4 decades in this country? They point out that this is women are the biggest beneficiaries, and that since the national living wage was introduced in 2016, the percentage of employees in low pay has fallen from 20.7% down to 17.1% last year.
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for raising that point. I haven't seen that report, so I will go away and dig it out. In addition to that, Mr. Speaker, we are investing £8 million to develop the evidence around what works to support people to progress in work. And this includes enhancing our operational capability to support claimants to make good decisions around job switching.
Thank you.
Chris Bryant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The thing is, it's really difficult for many families in my constituency who may be on the minimum wage, will have to travel quite substantial distances to be able to work and meet family responsibilities at the same time. They end up not being able to do enough hours to make the whole package add up at the end of the week. How is the government going to make sure that those kind of families really have a chance of providing for their families? That's all they're trying to do.
Minister Quince.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that question. The statistics do show that full-time work substantially reduces the chances of poverty, and the absolute poverty rate of a child where both parents work full-time is only 4% compared to 44% where one or more parents are in work. So we need to support more people into work. We're doing that, for example, by offering the 30 hours of free childcare to parents of 3- and 4-year-olds. The national living wage now at £8.21 and increasing to £10.50 by 2024, and we've taken millions out of paying tax altogether.
Eddie Hughes.
Number 6, Mr. Speaker.
Minister Mims-Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I would like to answer questions 6 and 15 together. This government is committed to providing targeted support for all our young people to give them the best chance of getting into work, and that includes the Youth Obligation Support Programme, Job Centre Plus support for schools, and the recently introduced mentoring circles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for that answer. I'd like to welcome the government funding that's been given to an organisation called Go Train, who provide recruitment and training services to businesses at no cost to the business. So will the Minister visit Walsall North in November, when a course will be provided specific to the Birchalls area of my constituency?
Minister.
Well, I was recently nearby at one of our Universal Credit Service Centres with the Honourable Gentleman, and it was absolutely clear that opportunities for young people in his constituency and the surrounding area was vital. So the DWP is working with the West Midlands Combined Authority to bring together local skills, employment support and those Job Centre Plus services, and we're investing £1.2 million into the West Midlands for extra resources, specifically also to help young people with the biggest hurdles in finding employment.
Ah, yes, I shall be having a cup of tea or coffee with the Honourable Gentleman, the member for Bexhill and Battle's mum during the course of this week, so doubtless we shall compare notes on the Honourable Gentleman's inquiry. Hugh Merriman.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking of young people, I'm sure that young people will welcome the decision to grant the living wage for those aged 21 to 25 at £10.50 an hour. But is the government satisfied that there will be no impact to young people and their job opportunities by them being paid the same rate as those that have more experience in the workplace?
I do welcome the Chancellor's announcement to bring more and younger people into the scope of the national living wage over the next 5 years. And just as they do now, employers will continue to select the best person for the job based on multiple factors. And like me, employers will take confidence from the fact that young people will have the chance to take advantage of the support offered to make sure that they're ready to meet those challenges and be that best person for the job, and therefore the local labour markets will still be strong.
Mr. Speaker, when are we going to see a glimmer of passion from this front bench about young people who have no employment opportunities? Has she looked at the Children's Commissioner report that showed that 20% of kids come out of schools in this country at this time with no qualifications, and a lot of them are already in the skills journey, in FE colleges, waiting to get an apprenticeship? What is she going to do about it?
Minister.
Wonderful passion, very much appreciated, and I will make no apology for bringing passion to this new role when it comes to youth unemployment. In fact, the Secretary of State behind me, I asked very explicitly that I could continue with my focus on young people. Please do not forget that youth unemployment under this government is almost halved since 2010.
Green.
The Minister may be aware of the Talent Match programme, which was run in Greater Manchester to reach young people not in education, employment or training. And we've learned a great deal about how to ally industrial education and skills and employment strategies for that group as a result of that programme. Will she look at devolving some of the initiatives she has described to Greater Manchester, along with funding, so that we can do more to work at sub-regional, city-regional level to support our young people effectively?
Minister.
I thank the Honourable Lady. I think place-based support and understanding is really important in terms of devolving down and making changes on the ground. Absolutely, with the changes to the ESF as we go forward and the opportunity with the Shared Prosperity Fund and working with our LEPs, with our local mayors, I think there's a great opportunity, because you may have fantastic employers around you as a young person but never know that there's those opportunities for you.
Noakes.
I
welcome my honourable friend's earlier comments about the national living wage and young people. Can I ask her what evidence she has based on the decision not to extend that down to 18, or whether she has perhaps considering providing the national living wage to those who are younger but still able to provide a great deal to employers and in the workplace?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for raising this issue, and she will know, sadly, if it was me, I would love to take it down to 18, but this is down to the Treasury, and I will direct the question accordingly.
My Gamesbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well-paid, secure work is a good route out of poverty. Yet far too many young people are not in education, employment and training. That's 11% under this government, or low-paid or on 0 hours contracts. Will the Minister press the Chancellor to set the national living wage at the same rate for all young people in work as Labour has committed to do? £10 an hour, 2020.
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman. I think everybody in this chamber speaking up for our young people does all of our communities a very great service. I think we need to have a mixture of chances and opportunities for our young people, whether it is mentoring. I'm particularly interested in the work that we do with schools around engagement with job centres. I don't think it's all about money. I think it's about skills and opportunities. But absolutely, I hear the honourable gentleman, as do many colleagues, but I'm hoping the Treasury would too.
Maria Caulfield.
Number 7, Mr. Speaker.
Minister Opperman.
We have extended the right to request flexible working, abolished the default retirement age, and introduced and financed the returner programme. I've seen the success of the returner programme with the company Release Potential, which is based in my Hexham constituency, and I've seen how they have helped many people back into work.
Maria Caulfield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the WASPI court ruling last week, if WASPI women were successful in appealing that ruling, would the government abide by that judgment and compensate the women accordingly?
Minister.
So I spent 20 years as a lawyer, Mr. Speaker. My last client was Mr. Ed Balls when he was Secretary of State for Education, and I can assure her that this government will abide by court decisions and follow the law. And if there is any changes to the 2 independent High Court judges who heard the case and made the decision, then clearly the government will obey that.
Yvette Cooper.
I've been contacted by my constituent who said, I have to work as a cleaner and it's hard physical work. I am nearly 63 and getting health problems. Our retirement age has been changed and we have had little time to plan for this, so have little alternative but to keep working. Does the Minister not get that the real injustice here is for so many women who have had no time to plan with their pensions, no time to plan with their savings, no time to plan for their families, but were told in their late 50s they would have to work for so much longer? And those WASPI women are not going to go away. When will the Minister give them a fair deal?
Well, I say with great respect and very gentleness that the Honourable Lady, I believe, served in the Department for Work and Pensions as a minister during the period of time when the state pension age was raised by successive Labour governments, and in circumstances when the court in the judgment last Thursday, indicated that the state, including the Labour government of 13 years, she asked me the question, let me finish. The Labour government of 13 years acted appropriately by making due notification in the way that they particularly did.
Ah, yes, the good doctor, Dr. Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I accept everything that the Minister has just said, but does he accept that successive governments, despite their best efforts, failed to get the message across to enough people that the retirement age for women was rising exponentially? And will the government try to look at some of the proposals by people like Baroness Altman for ways in which alternative schemes could mitigate the problems that have resulted?
Minister.
So, with great respect to the honourable gentleman, I would refer him to the judgment in last Thursday's case, a copy of which I will place in the Library of the House of Commons, and particularly refer him to paragraphs 118 of the judgment and the successive paragraphs that outline the exact work that was done in copious detail, which was set out by the High Court.
Jack Jeremy.
Mr. Speaker, 3.8 million women born in the 1950s who built Britain face hardship as a consequence of pension changes by this government and argued before the court with cavalier disregard. They were told that they had no right to be consulted in terms of the change of retirement age. Labour has already committed to some preliminary measures, early retirement, pension credit, and we will now consult with the women concerned about how much further we can go to bring justice to them. Can I ask this question of the Minister? Thus far, the government has committed to nothing. The Prime Minister said, however, during the Conservative leadership contest, and I quote, "He is committed to doing everything he can to bring justice to the 1950s women." Can the Minister update the House on progress, or will this be just another cynical, broken promise on the part of the Prime Minister?
Well, clearly these matters are the matter of a court case which may be the subject of appeal, but with real great respect to the honourable gentleman who is, to his discredit, a friend of mine, the honest truth is that he should be consulting with a 1950s-born woman who was Secretary of State for the Department of Work and Pensions, who is the Member of Parliament for Camberwell and Peckham, who is also his wife, who was also responsible for the continuation of the self-same policy that he now objects to. And it is the Labour Party for 13 years who did the perfectly proper thing of taking due account of equality and the rises in life expectancy, and it is something that they should stick to, having made the decisions for 13 years.
Jack Lepresti.
Number 8, Mr. Speaker.
Minister Quinn.
Mr. Speaker, universal credit takes earnings into account in a way that is fair and transparent. The amount of universal credit paid reflects as closely as possible the actual circumstances of a household during each monthly assessment period, including any earnings reported by the employer during the assessment period, regardless of when they were paid.
Presti.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But does my honourable friend have any plans, or is there any consideration into perhaps introducing a mechanism into universal credit so it allows claimants to move their review date?
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that question. As I said, monthly assessment periods align to the way the majority of employees are paid and also allows universal credit to be adjusted each month. This means that if a claimant's income falls, they will not have to wait several months for a rise in their UC. Now, we've produced guidance to help ensure claimants, staff and representatives are aware of the importance of reporting accurate dates and the impact on payment cycles. I'm conscious my honourable friend has written to me. I'll be very happy to meet with him, and indeed the honourable member for Thurston Moulton, who also raised this issue.
Harold Monaghan.
Speaker, I've been contacted by a number of constituents who have received unexpected pay, for example, like holiday pay during the assessment period. Now, because that pay is unexpected, it then impacts on the amount of universal credit they are awarded. So what work is the Minister doing to ensure that unexpected pay, like holiday pay, is not going to severely impact their award?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I've said, the amount of UC paid to claimants reflects as closely as possible the actual circumstances of a household during each monthly assessment period, and they do align to the way the majority of employees are paid. I do recognise the issue. I've said I'm happy to meet with two other honourable colleagues. I'd be very happy to meet with the honourable lady also.
Mr. Speaker, I raised this issue with the Christmas last year because many enlightened employers will pay their staff early in December so they can afford Christmas. She told me it was fixed. However, I was phoned last week on my 24-hour helpline by a constituent who, because her partner was paid on the 28th of the month the previous month and then the 27th of the month subsequently, it appeared to the computer at least that they'd had a 100% pay rise and her benefit was cut to £11. Can we fix this, particularly before Christmas this year?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The simple answer to my honourable friend is yes, I'm looking at ways in which we can do this. I think it's important to put this in context, though, Mr. Speaker, that UC replaces the outdated and complex benefit system of the past, which too often stifle people's potential, creating cliff edges at 16, 24 and 30 hours, and punitive effective tax rates of over 90% for some, punishing people for doing the right thing. UC seeks to take earnings into account in a way that's fair and transparent, and we want to preserve this simplicity as far as possible.
Tom Break.
Number 9, Mr. Speaker.
Indeed. Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, I'd like to answer questions 9 and 23 together. Universal credit payment timeliness continues to improve and is near a record high, with the most recent data showing we paid 83% of new claims in full and on time.
Break.
Can I thank the Secretary of State for saving herself to answer my question? I welcome that. She will know that this 5-week delay is still causing huge harm. So could I ask her what effort the DWP is making to ensure that UC recipients aren't penalised by other organisations for the 5-week gap in their incomes? And also, what extra support can the government give to organisations that support universal credit recipients with financial management during this very difficult period?
Well, Mr Speaker, it's important to recognise the help to claim. I think it's the £39 million of support that's been given through the Citizens Advice Bureau to try and help people who may not always be there with their the paperwork that's required. So we are making best efforts so that people can make the right claims so they can be paid on time. As regards to other elements, of course, the advance is available, which can be then repaid over a 12-month period.
Lisa Forbes.
With former Thomas Cook employees being offered food bank vouchers by the Department for Work and Pensions, and the Trussell Trust in Peterborough reporting a 50% increase in the number of food parcels given to my constituents in the last year alone, can the Minister tell us what assessment they think that these figures will impact on the collapse of Thomas Cook?
Well, Mr Speaker, the Honourable Lady was at our first task force, and I'm sure she will be impressed with the work that we've already been doing together, including the jobs fair that happened last Thursday. It is important, and we've seen that with Thomas Cook ex-employees, that they have got to universal claim, or some of them have quickly, so they can get the support that they need. I welcome, actually, the support that's given through the Trussell Trust in order to help people in this difficult time. But as soon as we can encourage people to come into the Job Centre Plus and start claiming universal credit, the sooner we can help.
Margaret Greenwood.
Mr Speaker, without giving this House a debate or a vote as they had promised, the Government has pushed through regulations for the pilot of universal credit managed migration and payments to severely disabled people who lost out in being forced to transfer to universal credit. Will the Government explain why those payments still do not fully reflect the financial loss those disabled people have suffered?
Mr Speaker, there is an extra £600 million of support going to the most vulnerable. I really do want to encourage the opposition to withdraw their EDM, because if they succeed in praying against this, they are hitting the most vulnerable people, and I'm sure that's not something that they wish to be remembered for.
Alan Brown.
Here, here. Number 10, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and again, with permission, I'd like to answer questions 10 and 12 together. The Department's resource budget will increase by 1.9% ahead of inflation for the first time since 2011, enabling us to provide excellent customer service, help people move into and progress in work, and provide financial security through timely benefit payments. As part of this, DWP has been allocated £106 million to support vulnerable people and help tackle private rented sector housing affordability through additional funding for discretionary housing payments.
Brown.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation has highlighted that with more social housing and lower housing costs, Scotland's poverty figures are lower than the rest of the UK. The reality is the biggest poverty factor is still Tory austerity. Now, the IFS has estimated recent announcements will only mitigate a quarter of the cuts implemented since 2010. It's quite clear from the the Secretary's answer, 1.9% increase is not enough. If austerity is really ending, when will the other three-quarters of the cuts have been implemented be reversed?
Well, Mr Speaker, the Honourable Gentleman will be aware that the Government has lifted 400,000 people out of absolute poverty since 2010, and income inequality has fallen. Now, I would encourage the Honourable Gentleman to go back to the Scottish Government and see what they are doing more to actually increase the number of higher paid jobs, because we all know that the best way out of poverty is to work.
Marion Phillips.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And on this subject, yet again, the spending round did nothing to address the cuts to the local housing allowance and pressures on private renters, who are £38.49 a week worse off due to this UK Government's benefits freeze. To ensure affordability, prevent evictions and hardship, will the Secretary of State immediately increase the LHA to the pre-2010 level and uprate it in line with inflation and rent increases?
Well, Mr Speaker, I just laid out that we did actually increase the amount of money for discretionary housing payments. Now, I'm conscious that part of I'm conscious that I've already met or spoken to Shirley Ann Somerville, the Scottish Minister, and it's my intention to go and see her soon. But there are elements which she knows that the Scottish Government can do with the funding that they have.
Steve Double.
Number 11, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Tomlinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have made significant progress to improve support and have seen the number of working-age disabled people in employment increase by over 1 million in the last 6 years. However, we continue to focus on improving our services for those who use them. This includes the current consultational measures aimed at reducing ill health-related job losses.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Minister for that answer. But could he say what specific help is available to young people with disabilities in order to support them getting into work?
My honourable friend is right to highlight this very important area, and I am very proud that I helped champion disability apprenticeships, and through the Access to Work scheme that is now seeing record numbers benefiting, we saw a 34% increase in 16 to 24-year-olds using this, opening up more opportunities for employment.
Marsha de Cordova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The catalogue of DWP's own failings has created a hostile environment for disabled people. Figures released this year showed that almost 6,000 people died within 6 months of being found fit for work. The announcement of the new independent serious case panel lacks any meaningful detail or terms of reference or purpose. So, can the Minister confirm whether or not this new panel will actually be reviewing previous social security benefit deaths, and will he also set out what the statement of purpose is for this new independent panel?
Mr. Speaker, we work all year round with claimants, with stakeholders, with charities, organisations with real-life experience to help improve not only the training but the understanding of all areas of disability and health conditions. And we back this with genuine financial support that now sees this government spending £55 billion per year, 2.5% of all government spend and 6% of GDP, a record high of £9 billion in real terms to support people with disabilities.
Number 13, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is a priority for this government to provide swift access to support those who need it, whilst also protecting the same people from potentially fraudulent behaviour. Now, if a claimant does not have the documentary evidence we need, we can verify using biographical tests and checks and using information held on the department systems, by confirmation also of third-party organisations and by 2 members of job centre staff knowing and recognising the claimant also as part of their work.
Mr. Speaker, this is not what is happening in practice. Constituents are coming to me who have had their claims denied or just been turned away and said, go and find the documentation. And Newcastle Citizens Advice Bureau also reflects this. So will the Minister firstly guarantee to me that no vulnerable claimant will be turned away because of not having the right documentation, and also write to me with the number who have had their claims denied because of lack of documentation, so we can see the size of the problem?
I thank the Honourable Lady, and I know that she's passionate about her constituency. I think it's absolutely right that we balance, in particular, all people with particular vulnerabilities. But in order to get a universal credit claim right, we need to make sure that we're verifying the identity and the person. We heard earlier about the challenge if this is done fraudulently. So I think we need to understand that we need to intervene where there's particular need. Home visits are also possible, and we heard earlier around help to claim. If the Honourable Lady would like to give me the details, I'm very happy to look into this further.
Gentleman member for Rugby can legitimately shoehorn his in question 19 into this.
Mr. Speaker, and the Secretary of State's already referred to the valuable role of Citizens Advice Bureau, and in Rugby they do fantastic work. They've told me about challenges clients face when they transition to employment and support allowance to universal credit. Can the Minister reassure me that the transition from ESA to universal credit is being sensitively and effectively managed?
Minister.
Absolutely. My apologies. I didn't realise that was for me. Yes, the department is absolutely committed to making sure that we have the most compassionate and approachable opportunities for people to claim in every single constituency. I've met with work coaches from Scotland to Crawley to Walsall who are absolutely doing this day to day and help to claim backs this up.
Stephen Morgan.
Number 16, Mr Speaker.
Minister Quint.
Mr Speaker, this government takes issues of child poverty extremely seriously. The evidence shows that work is the best route out of poverty, and there are 730,000 fewer children in workless households compared with 2010. But there is more to do here. One child in poverty is one too many, and it is a key priority of both myself and the Secretary of State. I will continue to work with colleagues from across the House, other government departments and stakeholders to identify and tackle the root causes of poverty.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Children are not getting the nutrition that they need on the 170 days per year when they are not at school. Local authorities and devolved governments are tackling this issue head-on. Why isn't this government?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, this is probably a question for the Department for Education, but we are supporting over 1 million children with free school meals, investing up to 26 million in school breakfast clubs, providing approximately 2.3 million children aged 4 to 6 with a portion of fresh fruit or vegetables each day at school, and through the Healthy Start programme, hundreds of thousands of low-income families benefit from vouchers which can be redeemed against fruit, vegetables, milk and infant formula.
Stephen Timms.
You, Mr Speaker, child poverty is being driven up by the 5-week delay that people have to wait before they receive universal credit. Will the Minister confirm that what Ministers refer to as an advance is in fact a loan which has to be repaid by claimants? And will the Minister commit to scrapping this 5-week delay?
Minister Quint.
Well, Mr Speaker, I think this one's been answered several times already. But up to 100% advance payments are available from day one of a universal credit claim, and budgeting support is available for anyone who needs extra help. The repayment time, Mr Speaker, for these advances has been extended to 12 months and will be further extended to 16 months from October 2021.
There was a discernible world weariness in the Minister's reference to this question having been answered several times already. I simply remind those observing our proceedings that repetition is not a novel phenomenon in the House of Commons. Never has been, and I doubt that things are going to change very much. Margaret Greenwood.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. An article in the British Medical Journal shows researchers highlight a potential link between an increase in the number of babies dying before their first birthday and child poverty. The researchers estimate that there are an additional 570 excess deaths in the period 2014-17 and that 172 of those were attributable to increases in child poverty. So will the Secretary of State scrap the 2-child limit and the benefit cap that are driving up child poverty?
Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I humbly suggest few in this chamber have raised the issue of child and infant mortality more than I have. I take this issue incredibly seriously. I have read that particular report. Mr Speaker, no one in government wants to see poverty rising, and wages have outpaced inflation for 18 months, and there are more people in work than ever before. Mr Speaker, we know that children in households where no one works are around 5 times more likely to be in poverty than those in households where all adults work, and our welfare reforms are incentivising work and supporting working families.
Topical questions. Graham Morris.
Topical number 1, sir.
Secretary of State.
Well, Mr Speaker, it's a pleasure to be here today as the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, leading a fantastic department that serves people from the Shetlands to the Scilly Isles, with over 20 million customers across the country. And already in my short time in this role, I've witnessed firsthand the inspiring, incredible work of civil servants right across the country, which they are benefiting from as well in seeing that our unemployment rate continues at a joint record high and unemployment rate at its lowest since the 70s. But there is more to do, and I will keep focusing on what we need to do in improving the payment of universal credit, but also ensuring that we support everyone in society.
Morris.
I'm grateful for the Minister's sunny disposition and her outline of the priorities, but the retirement plans of millions of women born in the 1950s are in ruins because of a decision by the previous Conservative Lib Dem coalition government to accelerate increases in state pension age. Last week, a decision in the High Court makes it clear that only a political decision will deliver a just solution for these women. So will the government now give the WASPy women dignity in retirement? 197 MPs have signed EDM 63, calling for justice for the WASPy women and for this historic injustice to be put right.
Well, Mr Speaker, the High Court did set out quite clearly that successive governments had taken a measured approach in recognising the inequality in the state pension age, but also the need to increase state pension age. Indeed, the 2000 Act started that trigger going beyond 65. I think it's important to recognise that and the efforts that were made to communicate. But I want to assure the House that, of course, he will be aware that there are record numbers of women in employment, and we will continue to do that to support them fulfil their careers.
Double. Speaker, I'm privileged to have the Universal Credit Processing Centre for the South West in my constituency. The staff there do an incredible job of making sure the rollout of UC is successful. They've done so well that they've actually been asked to take on processing for a number of London boroughs as well. But they are experiencing currently very high levels of caseloads because of the transfer of ESA to Universal Credit. So will the Secretary of State make sure that they get all of the resources they need to support these incredibly hard-working frontline staff?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right to praise the people who work for the DWP in his constituency. We do have over 4,000 civil servants in service centres nationally, and we constantly monitor the volume of work as Universal Credit grows. But I want to assure my honourable friend that, of course, sufficient places will be in support of those workers in his constituency.
Sarah Wollaston.
Thank you. Last month I met with my constituent, Dr. Karen Gilmore, who's a specialist in pain management, and a number of her colleagues and members of the Independent Assessment Service. We discussed the way that PIP assessments in particular don't really meet the needs of people who are living with chronic and severe pain. And I wonder whether the Minister would agree to meet with Dr. Gilmore and myself to discuss how we can improve these assessments.
I thank the honourable member. I'd be very happy to meet with both herself and her colleague. We are determined to continue to improve PIP. What we have seen is that 31% of claimants now access the highest rate of support compared to just 15% under the legacy. I welcome any additional information.
Mr. Speaker, as we've heard, many 1950s-born women have now reached the age at which they're expected to be receiving a pension and are not, and many are struggling. Given the judicial review is now out of the way, will the new Secretary of State agree to meet me and my co-chair of the all-party group on 1950s women, so we can discuss some of the proposals that were put in the transitional arrangement document which we produced? And can she also give us an estimate of how many women are affected in this way, that they are in work or not in work?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think that was about 4 questions in one, but I'd be delighted to meet him and the honourable lady in due course.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The benefits freeze has driven increased food bank usage in my constituency as families' incomes falls far below rising costs. So the benefits freeze is supposed to end in April. What work is the Secretary of State doing now to assess the real minimum income levels necessary to avoid destitution?
Well, Mr. Speaker, any such decisions need to be made fairly soon, and I'm conscious of the work and of the analysis that's being presented to me and to my honourable friend, the member for Colchester, as we take forward decisions on that matter.
Peter Heaton-Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Friday, I visited the new Barnstable Work Club, a fantastic initiative giving support to those who are seeking employment, and particularly those with disabilities. Would the Minister join me in welcoming this new initiative, thanking the volunteers who are taking part, and thanking Barnstable Library for hosting it?
Well done. It would be an absolute pleasure to thank those volunteers who are doing so much to create new opportunities for disabled people, something I know my honourable friend, as the MP for that constituency, regularly champions, as I've seen firsthand on some very, very good visits to his constituency.
Peter Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the start of Challenge Poverty Week, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation have this morning published a report into Poverty in Scotland 2019, which looks at some of the reasons why the levels of poverty in Scotland are not quite as bad as are in the rest of the UK. And one of the major factors they've identified is the much greater availability of affordable housing, and in particular the impact of 20 years almost of council house building and 87,000 affordable houses built by the Scottish Government since 2007. Will the Minister agree that, just as they might claim work is the best way out of poverty, unaffordable housing is a surefire way into poverty? And will the Government learn the lessons of what's happening in Scotland, make social housing and council housing something to be celebrated instead of something to be demonised?
Well, where I do agree with the honourable gentleman, Mr. Speaker, is that secure and stable accommodation is, of course, one of the routes out of poverty. It will come as no surprise to honourable gentlemen that I raise this issue regularly with my counterpart at the Department for Housing, Communities and Local Government, and I have been pushing them to look at more affordable and homes for social rent as part of their policy initiatives.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As chairman of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Youth Employment, I warmly welcome the Minister's announcement about additional support for our young people. Can the Minister confirm that mentoring will be an important part of that, as it's been proved that mentoring will help those, especially those furthest from the labour market and the most vulnerable, into work?
I thank my honourable friend for bringing up this issue. In fact, in the middle of last year, there were 63 new mentoring circles occurring, originally focused on the race disparity audit, but now rolling out all across the country as agreed last January. In fact, met one recently in Basingstoke, where it was having a real effect on local people who, as young people, know what's around them, and mentors, businesses and employers can really do so much to change young people's lives locally.
Childcare in York can cost over £1,000 a month, and for those on universal credit, they're being asked to pay that amount up front. So what is the Secretary of State doing to ensure providers get the resources they need and claimants aren't having to pay?
Well, Mr. Speaker, childcare under universal credit is far more generous than it was under the legacy benefit system. And the other recent change, Mr. Speaker, to point out is that the flexible support fund can now be used to pay deposits or first month's payments.
Amy Perkins. I didn't go over there. I know the honourable gentleman is normally paying the closest possible attention. Is that none of the honourable members sitting on the government benches wish to contribute to these proceedings, and therefore I lighted on the oratorical opportunities offered by the honourable gentleman. Toby Perkins.
I'm grateful. There is literally nothing else to say about Conservative welfare policy. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, that anyone who has met people who work in a food bank or people who work with the homeless recognise there is an absolutely direct link between welfare policy, the sanctions regime and the increase in homelessness and poverty that we have. What serious work will the government do to either address this link or at least have the decency and honesty to admit it's an absolutely accepted part of government policy that we see this increase in homelessness and poverty?
Mr. Speaker, that's not simply the case. The first time I got involved in a food bank was in 2006, when there were people falling between the gaps. Now, I would want to say to the honourable gentleman, one of the things that I'm proudest about this Conservative government, of which we're part coalition, is you will be better off in work than if you're not in work, unless you cannot work, and we'll be the champion of the vulnerable. That is what universal credit is doing, to make sure that people can get more and more income, which I would have thought is something he would welcome.
Green.
Could the Secretary of State tell me what training is in place so that Job Centre and other DWP staff are properly aware to the needs of those claimants with learning difficulties? I've had a case in my constituency where a claimant has been left with just £40 a month to support his family because of the lack of support he received in the Job Centre. Could I have some information on the training that's provided?
I thank the honourable member for raising that. It's a really important area. What we are doing is we've doubled the number of disability employment specialist advisors, and we are making sure that we do everything in our power to identify those claimants who would need additional support, and this is a real priority for us.
Tom Brake.
What assessment has the Secretary of State made of the impact on DWP budgets of the failure to promise to uprate pensions for UK citizens in the EU for more than 3 years, and also to guarantee their health care beyond 6 months in a no-deal scenario?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman will know we are still in the middle of a negotiation for how we leave the European Union at the end of the month, and it's important to stress that this 3-year rise is something that we have done unilaterally. We encourage other EU countries to do exactly the same, and we will continue to support those people who have relied on UK pensions.
Emma Hardy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. People with a terminal illness want the choice whether to work or not, and they should expect help and support from their employer. Does the Minister support the TUC's Dying to Work campaign, which asks businesses to sign up and promise not to sack employees who have a terminal illness? And will she encourage more businesses to sign it?
Minister.
I thank the honourable member. The TUC have done some really good work in here, and we are working with employers to highlight the importance of making those sorts of changes. This is a really, really good area where I'm sure there would be cross-party support.
Ronnie Cowan.
Mr. Speaker, there are over 5,700 WASPy women in Inverclyde. Many have worked their entire adult life. They paid their dues. They were expecting a pension, not a benefit. If we marked around with MPs' pensions in the same fashion, many people in the government benches would be standing and asking questions. Will the SOS commit to undertaking an impact assessment for all women affected by changes in the state pension age, and once completed, offer a payment acknowledging any disadvantages caused?
Minister Opperman.
Well, I'm sure the honourable gentleman will be speaking to his own government, who have the power under the Scotland Act, sections 24, 26 and 28, to take interventions and address the same problem that he is now raising.
Cat Smith.
Why is the government not tracking young people when they leave the youth obligation? And as such, how do they know the scheme works?
Order! Very unseemly. The honourable lady was asking her question, and there is a lot of very noisy chuntering taking place between the SNP benches and the minister who luxuriates in the lather of the Treasury bench. It's very unfair on the honourable lady, very unseemly, very uncharacteristic of the honourable gentleman. He's normally a most emollient fellow. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Youth Obligation Programme is now being fully rolled out and is looking at 18 to 24-year-olds making a new claim on universal credit. And we have had an internal evaluation report in April 2018 which identified the need for this. We believe it's too soon to be looking at this, but I know the Honourable lady and I share a great interest in how we can support our young people. I'm happy to speak to her further on this.
Jim Cunningham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. One of the ways the government could start to put right the injustices to the women born in the early 50s who were denied their pensions is have a discussion with their colleagues in transport and local authorities and provide free bus passes. That would help them a lot.
Well, I refer the honourable gentleman to the judgment given by the High Court on Thursday, and obviously any individual local authorities who wish to address that point in a particular way.
Well, the honourable lady is being addressed by her leader, which is a very solemn matter. But nevertheless, I intrude in the hope that she still wishes to ask a question. Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. A-lead. Yes, further to the points already raised by other honourable members, there are 6,500 women in Edinburgh West who were born in the 1950s and have been affected by last week's court judgment. Can the Secretary of State assure me that in the meeting which she has now agreed to with the chairs of the APPG, there will be a meaningful attempt to address the issue, the poverty that these women face, and not just sweep it under the carpet like an inconvenient problem?
I refer to the Honourable Lady to the judgment, as my honourable friend has already pointed out. She may also wish to speak to her party leader because, of course, she joined me in the division lobbies when we made the changes that we did in the 2011 Pension Act. One of the things that I wish to make sure, or rather at least the coalition government did, I wish to make sure that we do have a sensible conversation going forward. But the judgment does stand. It is open for the ladies to appeal. But I can assure the House that we have made every effort, as did the Labour government before us, in making sure that people knew about these changes.
Thank you. Order. Urgent question. Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. An urgent question to the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union to make a statement on when the government intends to publish the full legal text of their proposed changes to the withdrawal agreement and political declaration.
Minister James Dudridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are unconditionally committed to finding a solution for the north-south border which protects the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and the commitments which can best be met if we explore solutions other than the backstop. The backstop risks weakening the delicate balance embodied in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement between both main traditions in Northern Ireland, grounded in agreement, consent and respect for minority rights. Any deal of Brexit on the 31st of October must avoid the whole of the UK or just Northern Ireland being trapped in an arrangement without consent where they are a rule taker. Both sides have always been clear that the arrangements for the border must recognise the unique circumstances of the island of Ireland and, reflecting that, be creative and indeed flexible. Under no circumstances will the United Kingdom place infrastructure, checks or controls at the border. On Wednesday, the 2nd of October, the government proposed a new protocol on Ireland, Northern Ireland. These were serious and realistic proposals that reflect the core aims put forward by both the UK and the EU. These proposals are consistent with the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and deliver our aim of avoiding any checks or infrastructure at the border. These proposals were set out in detail in an explanatory note and in a letter to the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker. The Prime Minister deposited both these documents in the Library of the House on Wednesday, the 2nd of October, and published them in parallel on gov.uk. To support these negotiations, draft legal text was also shared with the Commission on a confidential basis. The Prime Minister's Europe advisor David Frost and UK officials have been in intensive discussions with the Commission for some time now and will continue meeting with their counterparts from Task Force 50 for further technical talks this week. These meetings will cover our proposals on the protocol and also the political declaration to reflect the goal of a comprehensive free trade agreement. The previous withdrawal agreement and political declaration would have trapped the United Kingdom within European regulation and customs arrangements. The Prime Minister is continuing talks with EU leaders today, including the Prime Minister of Sweden, the Prime Minister of Denmark and the Prime Minister of Poland. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Exiting the European Union, is also travelling to EU capitals, including visiting Amsterdam and Valletta over the course of this week. Discussions with the Commission are ongoing and are sensitive, and we must ensure that we as a government act in a way that maximises our chance of success in these negotiations. We will, of course, keep the House informed as these discussions continue. The legal text which we have shared with the Commission will only be published when doing so will assist the negotiations. We hope that Brussels will decide to work with us over the upcoming days. If they do, we will leave with a new deal. If they don't want to talk, then we are prepared to leave without a deal. We need to get a new deal or a deal, but no more delays. We must get Brexit done so the country can move forward and focus on other issues such as the cost of living, the NHS and other domestic priorities.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for granting this urgent question. The Government has presented the EU with a 44-page legal text, a 7-page memorandum and a 4-page letter. In this House, we've seen the memorandum and the letter, but not the full legal text. And frankly, that's not good enough, because without the full legal text, we're being asked to guess what the detail of the Government's proposals actually are. Or worse, we're being asked to take the Prime Minister's word on it. We don't want a summary. We don't want the Prime Minister's interpretation of the text. We need to see the full legal text. Mr. Speaker, it matters because it appears that there appears to be what the Taoiseach has called, his word, a contradiction between what the Prime Minister tells this House, his word, and the words of the legal text. Last week, the Prime Minister, in response to a question from the Right Honourable Member from Ashford, said, and I quote, "The proposals we, the Government, are putting forward do not involve physical infrastructure at or near the border or indeed at any other place." I noted the words used by the Minister just now, and I hope he can clarify this. The contradiction that the Taoiseach appears to be highlighting is that the legal text may say something different on that very issue, and the Minister will know just how important that is. So can the Minister clear this up at this dispatch box now and say, does the full legal text bear out the Prime Minister's assertion to this House that his proposals do not entail physical infrastructure at the border, near the border, or in any other place? Because that's what he said, and that's what prompted the Taoiseach to say that the full text should be published. And this goes to the heart of the only defence the Minister has put forward, that of confidentiality, because both the Taoiseach and the President of the EU Commission have called for the legal text to be published. That shoots through the confidentiality argument. They want us to see the text so that we can properly debate and scrutinise what the government is putting forward. The only party insisting on secrecy is the UK government. So the question is obvious. What is the government hiding? And then there's the question of a level playing field. As this House knows, no Labour MP could support a deal that strips away or undermines workers' rights, environmental protections or consumer rights. Yet that's the very... Well, I hear the claims of it doesn't. If it doesn't, publish the text and assure the House. Before I came to this House, and since I've been at this House, I've dealt with summaries and interpretation of texts, and I've seen texts. And there are differences between the full text and somebody's summary or interpretation. If it's clear that it doesn't undermine workplace rights, environmental rights and consumer rights, publish the text and assure the House. What is being hidden? So can the Minister agree now to do the right thing and publish the full legal text forthwith? Thank you.
Minister Dudley.
I thank the honourable gentleman for those comments. Last week, I was able to say to the House that proposals would be tabled to the EU by the end of the week. Not only were we able to propose them, we were also able to publish them and share them with the House. It is the government's intention to share as much as possible, but at a time that's right and not at a time that will mean getting a good negotiation through takes precedence. The honourable gentleman from the front bench asks about the Prime Minister's position in relation to his assertion that there would be no checks at the border or near the border or at any other place. I've not seen the Taoiseach's exact comments, but I can confirm the position that the Prime Minister stated is still correct today and is the government's position, and I see no reason that is going to change. In relation to level playing fields, well, we're not hiding anything. We do not wish to undermine workers' rights. We will keep those workers' rights, and truth will tell over time when the honourable gentleman sees the results of the negotiation. But it is absolutely critical. The honourable gentleman wants a deal. I want a deal. We genuinely don't think that sharing the full text now will make doing a deal more likely.
Sir David Evanet.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I welcome my honourable friend the Minister's statement in response to the urgent question, and we all hope for no further delays on the Brexit negotiation. Is he aware that business groups across the country want certainty to allow them to plan for the future, and what discussions has he had with them to reassure them?
Mr.
I thank my right honourable friend for that question. Clearly he's been talking to business groups in his own constituency. Businesses certainly do want certainty, and whether it's meeting business groups here in England or in Northern Ireland or in Wales, everyone wants to get Brexit done. The last thing they want is more delay. We've had delay and delay and delay, and the answer to delay cannot be more delay.
Mr. Peter Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate the Minister in not once but twice managing to include all of this week's buzzwords on Brexit into such a very short, but I'm sorry to say not particularly informative answer. Today, the Government has only made public their version of a 7-page explanatory document on a full 44-page legal text. Last week, a number of government loyalists criticised us on these benches for saying we're likely to oppose the Prime Minister's plan before we'd read it properly. And they then went ahead and committed themselves to supporting it before they had read it properly. Because they can't have seen it properly, they can't have read it properly because nobody's seen it yet. It's simply not acceptable for us to be asked to commit to supporting something based on the Prime Minister's version of what it says, because none of us can trust what the Prime Minister tells us. Last week, twice the Prime Minister from the dispatch box assured us, once the honourable member for Banff-and-Buchan and once my honourable friend for Glasgow North, promised us the government are going to restore full control of Scotland's fishing to the people of Scotland. If only that was true. The Irish Taoiseach has told us that the Prime Minister's version of what's in the 44-page confidential document wasn't accurate. The Prime Minister told us last week there would be no checks on trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Even the 7-page summary tells us that was not true. So does the Minister not accept that if he's going to have any hope at all of getting this agreement agreed by Parliament, he's got to trust Parliament to see the full agreement, to see it now and not at the last minute when there isn't time to read 44 pages of detailed talks? So can the Secretary of State tell us, when is that going to be published? When can we expect to be asked to vote on the deal? How much notice will we have of what the detailed legal text is? And going back to the question that is still dodging yet, does the Prime Minister's proposal mean there will be additional infrastructure anywhere in relation to the Irish border? And if so, where will it be?
Hear, hear. Hear, hear.
Well, the legal text will come across at the right time. The honourable gentleman's critical of the Tory benches for supporting the Prime Minister before they've seen all the detail. I wouldn't be critical, and as a matter of default, I would suggest, honourable colleagues, always, as a matter of default, support the Prime Minister. I understand the members of the SNP will be more sceptical, but they will have all the information in front of them before they're asked to vote. But we're not going to provide that legal text if it is going to actually get in the way of the negotiations and get in the way of the deal, which I think the honourable gentleman would want.
Sarah Newton.
Speaker, is it not the case that as the government is approaching the final stages of the negotiation, that to get the necessary changes to the backstop, if the EU believe that this House will not support the government with that deal that it brings back, it's less likely that they will achieve that deal? We hear month after month after month that people want the government to negotiate a deal. So can I ask those members on the opposite benches that, like me, want a deal, now is the moment to speak up, get behind the government and support the government in getting that deal?
I thank the honourable lady for raising that point. Now is time for a deal, and actually the way the House has behaved has made it less likely that we're going to get a deal, more likely that we're going to get a no deal. But Mr. Speaker, it's not too late. This government is reaching out across the chamber to our friends on the other side and say, join us in supporting a deal. It's the right thing for the country.
Jo Swinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this year, the government said that if we left the EU with a deal, we would keep our world-leading standards and rights on food quality, employment and environmental protections. That commitment was pretty flimsy then, but now people fear it has been ditched in desperation and the government still won't even publish the text. Surely the public have a right to know if the Prime Minister is prepared to sacrifice the quality of food on the shelves in supermarkets, the rights of workers to take holiday and the rights of our children to breathe clean air.
We're supposed to be temperate in our language, Mr. Speaker, but quite frankly, that's a load of rubbish. That is not our intention, and our constituents, if they're worried and scared as a result of what the Liberal Democrats say, that is a terrible thing. It just simply is not true.
Andrew Percy.
Mr. Speaker, a few weeks ago from this spot, I said it didn't matter what the government brought back. There are members in here representing Leave seats who are always going to find a reason to vote against what the government brings forward, because the real aim is to stop us leaving. And isn't it the ultimate irony that the people who are giving the biggest croggy to a no-deal Brexit are the very people who repeatedly stand up and tell us we have to vote for compromise, who then vote against any compromise, any deal that's put on the table?
That's true.
I thank the honourable gentleman, and he's right, coming after the Liberal Democrats, particularly a problem with the Liberal Democrats, that for perfectly respectable reasons don't want a no deal, but won't back a deal. It makes sense for us all to get behind a deal, which is better than no deal. That's what the government want to do, and we reach out to all members of this House to support a deal.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Something doesn't quite add up here on this issue of there being no physical infrastructure at any other place. And that's probably one of the reasons why the government's proposals are currently not acceptable to the European Union. Now, last week, the Prime Minister told the BBC, and I quote, there will have to be a system for customs checks away from the border. The explanatory note said that such checks would take place at traders' premises or other designated locations. Right. And the explanatory note also says, and I quote, goods moved under either mechanism would be under customs supervision by one or other customs authority from the point at which they're declared for export until they are cleared by customs in the territory of import for free circulation. Could the Minister name any other jurisdictions in the world where there are customs checks but no customs infrastructure?
Well, the government are looking for a tailored solution of all the trade between the UK and Northern Ireland. Only 1% of goods cross the border. As well as trusted trader schemes, goods could potentially be examined by authorities at commercial sites run by hauliers and freight forwarding companies. This is already provided under existing transit rules where logistics services are commonly approved as authorised consignees for these very purposes. It already happens.
Sir Desmond Swain.
Mr. Speaker, were any of the frightful diminution of rights referred to by the Honourable Lady to occur, clearly they would require primary legislation of this Parliament, wouldn't they?
Yes, we wouldn't put them forward, I wouldn't support them, and I don't think my honourable friend would support them. Maybe the Liberal Democrats can say whether they would support them.
Mary Cray.
Speaker, we know the Prime Minister thinks that preparation is really just for girly swats, but at least the last Prime Minister gave us a 90-page white paper on her proposals, and we got to see them at the same time as the European partners. Here we are, 11 days before the summit. We have this pathetic rag, 4 pages and an explanatory note. It would be comical if it was not that the Good Friday Agreement and the promises contained therein were resting on this. Can the Minister explain the magic thinking by which we have a border down the Irish Sea and a border on the island of Ireland without border posts?
Well, I would acknowledge, and I think the whole House would, that we're working under compressed timescales prior to the other negotiation. But what I would say to the Honourable Lady is those negotiations weren't successful, and following the same tack in our negotiating strategy would only be foolish, expecting a different result. It was time for a change in tack in negotiations, and I welcome that.
Victoria Prentice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As part of the group MPs for a Deal, it would make my life easier if we were to include the environmental and workers' protections as requested by many people on the benches opposite. But would the Minister agree with me that very probably the right place for those protections is in the political declaration?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her work with MPs for a deal, bringing together MPs across a number of political parties, and very much welcome her introducing the issue of the political declaration. Getting the political declaration right will set the tone going forward from the 1st of November after we've left on the 31st, and form the basis of the future economic partnership and the first-in-class free trade agreement I think most people in this House want.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, can I first of all thank the Minister for his response to the questions and wish him well in the job that he's doing. In addition to the fishing sector, in relation to the fishing sector, can the Minister confirm that there is no intention to change the original position that the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland will take back control of our seas and our fisheries and enable our fishing sector to grow, to create jobs, and that we, the citizens of this country and this great nation, will be in charge and control?
I thank the honourable gentleman for that contribution, as a number of others. I can confirm that, but would encourage him to discuss the detail with my colleagues at DEFRA, and if that's not to his satisfaction, I'm happy to talk to him about fishing rights at the same time, or impact.
Rachel McLean.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. Does my honourable friend agree that it is the agenda of members from the parties opposite to overturn the referendum result, to put a stop to Brexit, to revoke Article 50? And can he confirm that this government and this Prime Minister will not let that happen?
I thank my honourable friend for that contribution. It's with great sadness, Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that I fear there are some people on the benches opposite and in this House that simply don't want to follow the mandate of the British people. They don't want to exit, and they will use every trick and turn in the book to frustrate. Now, that is not to say there aren't some genuine concerns, and I recognise those, but my honourable friend is right. There are some people that are just trying to get over having offered the referendum to the electorate. They don't like the result and are trying to interfere and overturn the democratic will of the public.
Antonia Antoniazzi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister confirm whether the full legal text has been shown to the DUP? And if so, why is it reasonable for one party to be able to make an informed judgment about the government's proposals, whilst everyone else is kept in the dark?
I'm not going to get into the detail of... People opposite that have been ministers will realise lots of people see documents. Ministers do not constantly want to be in the position of saying who's seen what documents, which versions and when. I will not comment on who has seen which documents, nor indeed will I comment on documents that I've seen or haven't seen.
Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I love the way that opposition parties are implying that if only they could see these documents, they'd rush to support the deal. What I would say to my honourable friend is that I think the British public now are wise to the way in which Parliament has frustrated the government's negotiating position. Would it be possible for the government to strengthen its negotiating hand by actually holding a vote on these proposals in the way that we did on the Brady Amendment in January and show that there's a majority in this place for them?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. I think members of the Parliament, members of the public are getting wise as to what's going on. This government is trying to deliver Brexit. This Parliament collectively is trying to frustrate it. I think she raises an interesting solution of putting a vote, and I will discuss that with my ministerial colleagues.
Angela Eagle.
Speaker, has the Minister seen the documents himself?
I've already said I will not comment on which documents I have and haven't seen, which versions I have and haven't seen. But this is a negotiation. I say to the honourable lady, this is a document that we are negotiating on. It makes sense to look at that document, negotiate on that document, and come back to the House with a final document. This House doesn't want a blow-by-blow account. It wants to deliver a deal.
Richard Draps.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As has been said by honourable colleagues on this side of the bench, it is a well-known fact, and the public are not fooled, that most MPs in this place do not want to leave the EU in all positions in this place, which is a dishonourable stance to take after the EU referendum. Can my honourable friend tell the public and reassure them, reassure us, that we will honour this referendum and leave the EU with or without a deal on the 31st of October?
I thank the honourable member for Dorset, and I can reassure the people of Dorset and the United Kingdom that we will be leaving on the 31st of October. Our preference is to do so with a deal, but we're very much ready to leave with no deal.
Anna Soubry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm sure that, Mr. Speaker, you may not have heard the use of the word that those of us who think that our country, our great country's made a mistake, are somehow dishonourable in doing nothing more than speaking out with the freedom that I thought was at the heart of our democracy. And I would have hoped the honourable gentleman might have withdrawn his comments. In any event, Mr. Speaker, it's very odd that we're all being asked to support a deal, the details of which we know very little, unless, of course, our name was Arlene Foster. Can I ask the Minister this? The reason why we want to know about the detail of these custom arrangements and these structures and the infrastructure is because there are other countries, notably Norway and Sweden, Sweden, member of the single market and the customs union. Norway in the single market but not the customs union, and they have a hard border. So can we have these unicorn details, please?
Well, I must say, Mr. Speaker, whilst reaching out across the floor, I've given up on reaching out to the honourable lady. There are many people opposite. There's still hope for people that will support a plan. But I suspect under no circumstances will she support a plan, regardless of what we produce and regardless of what it says.
That may well be true, but I hope the right honourable lady, who's not too delicate a flower, can bear the almost unendurable pain of the criticism of the Minister with such stoicism and fortitude as she feels able in the circumstances to muster. Mr. Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the Leader of the Opposition said that no self-respecting Labour MP could vote for these proposals, and yet now we are being pressed on what is a confidential document which actually, to produce, would undermine yet again our negotiating position. Would the Minister agree with me that, in actual fact, to reveal these documents would make a no-deal more likely?
I thank my honourable friend for raising that question. No deal is made more likely by the House not supporting the government's position. As for the Leader of the Opposition, I think both MPs and the public are coming round to the idea that he's flip-flopping left, right and centre on these issues and want a general election so they can re-elect a government with a strong Conservative majority.
Clive Betts.
A few days ago, I asked the Minister whether the term infrastructure included cameras. He wasn't quite sure at the time. Now he's had a few days to go away and look it up. Could he give us an answer?
He hasn't read the document.
I don't think I said I wasn't quite sure. I think I used the words it would have been something that was considered, but the House shouldn't read anything into that in any way. I think that's virtually verbatim of what I've said, and that remains the position.
Mr. Peter Bone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the Minister could help the House. The opposition benches say that they're not supporting a deal because they're worried about workers' rights. Yet if we had a deal, it would be this House that decided on workers' rights. And if they were ever in government, they could do whatever they like. Can we only conclude that the opposition benches don't think they'll ever be in government?
I thank the honourable gentleman for that. I think everyone in this House believes in higher protections of workers' rights and maintaining those and expanding them over time. I think he does make an interesting point about their level of confidence. Not only are they not confident they'll be in government to improve workers' rights, they also don't seem to be confident that they'll even win a general election, because they're running scared of going back to the people, because they know they're trying to overturn the will of the people that wanted Brexit.
Pat McFadden.
Paragraph 13 of the memo issued last week confirms that even if the European Union agrees these proposals, and even if this Parliament then agreed these proposals, they wouldn't come into force for more than a year unless they had also been endorsed by the Northern Ireland Executive, which hasn't met for several years. Can the Minister confirm that if the Northern Ireland Executive continues to fail to meet, then the proposals automatically fall away after 12 months?
The honourable gentleman's right. We're in a constrained period. We're trying to do an unprecedented amount of work. They're already, even separate to the problem that he is speaking directly of, many hurdles to get over. But we will work together with all our partners to reform Stormont. That is our priority in relation to Northern Ireland, so we can get this deal through.
Vicky Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the last general election, more Chelmsford constituents emailed me about the environment and animal welfare than all other issues put together. And I am enormously proud of the way this government is leading the world on protecting the environment and on endangered species. Does my right honourable friend agree that the Lib Dems' suggestion that this deal, which is to resolve the issues on the Irish border, could somehow be used to undermine our standards on the environment, animal welfare or workers' rights is pure scaremongering and totally irresponsible.
I thank my friend, the honourable member for Chelmsford. Not only will we maintain environmental and animal welfare standards, I know she works tirelessly to improve those standards, both in Chelmsford and also with the backbenchers. I remember many a campaign that she has led in her time in the House of Commons, particularly on environmental issues and recycling and changing behaviours and perceptions. I thank her for that work, and there's nothing in this process that means that we're going to go back on any of these commitments. In fact, this government is committed to going further, as she has been demanding.
Dr. Sarah Wollaston.
Mr. Speaker, it's almost as if members of the government have been taking lessons dancing around slippery poles this afternoon. Essentially, we don't have a credible deal because there are no customs borders anywhere in the world without some form of physical infrastructure. And we have a government that still is insisting it will obey the law, but only the ones it chooses to obey. Will the Minister, at least this afternoon, confirm that the government will comply with the spirit and the provisions of the Benn Act in full?
In answer to the latter question, yes. And when it comes to slippery poles, I think the thing that is slippery is putting forward a 10-minute rule bill to say if honourable members, for whatever reason, move to one side of the House and leave their party, they should stand for a by-election, and then not doing the same thing herself when she crosses the floor. That's slippery.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
My honourable friend, the Minister, had a strong outing on this subject on the 26th of September, a date I happen to remember, and today I noticed a subtle difference in his wording when he talked about us leaving with a deal or being prepared to leave without a deal on the 31st of October. Can he confirm we're not only prepared to leave without a deal on the 31st of October, but we actually will leave without a deal on the 31st of October unless we have a deal?
I thank the honourable gentleman and confirm nothing has changed since his birthday, which I think is what he was referring to. And apologies, I didn't congratulate him at the time for that. My language was not nuanced in any way. We will be leaving on the 31st of October with a deal or without a deal.
If I were charitable, I would say that the right honourable gentleman turned 58 on the 26th of September, but I'm afraid I mustn't mislead the House. And Chris Bryant.
Can I just ask about the political declaration, because that's of as much concern to many of us as any of the other elements of the withdrawal agreement, and in particular because the former Prime Minister was quite right to say that if there's no deal on security. All the elements of security are shunted forward into the political declaration. I just wonder where we're at with extradition, because since the original version of the political declaration was signed, 4 European countries, major European countries, have said that they will not, on any terms, extradite their own nationals to the UK if we are no longer members of the European Union. Isn't that going to pose a significant problem for us if we want to get people to face justice in this country?
I thank the honourable gentleman for raising that. Obviously, the broader case is the Convention of the 50s on extradition will come into place. There is a case of and a problem with 4 or 5 countries, and we're having discussions with those countries now. But those are quite significant difficulties in that they are constitutional arrangements. However, there are other arrangements that are not entirely satisfactory around trying people in their home countries that can be used if we don't get a workaround. It's not ideal, but there are workarounds in place, and the ones we're progressing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Minister explain to the House and update the House on the volume of trade that will be subject to these special customs arrangements that so much heat and light has been discussed? And would he confirm that with good political will on both sides, problems can be resolved?
Well, Mr. Speaker, where there's a will, there's a way. People said that it was impossible that negotiations were going to reopen, but negotiations did effectively reopen after the Prime Minister spoke to President Macron and Merkel. So I am optimistic. I am optimistic that negotiations are ongoing now. David Frost is in Brussels as we speak. My Secretary of State is travelling, whipping up support and enthusiasm from other member states. And I understand, if not as we're speaking, around the time we're speaking, the Prime Minister is on the phone to other Prime Ministers to whip up enthusiasm for the deal and avoid no deal. If only there wasn't that much enthusiasm on the benches opposite.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
With respect, but who does the government think they're kidding? The reaction from the EU to the Prime Minister's proposals is courteous but critical. And it's abundantly evident that no agreement will be reached on his terms. We ask only of the Prime Minister that he is straight with the people and their Parliament and acknowledges this. And can he guarantee that the Prime Minister will not therefore hold a meaningless vote before the European Council meeting?
Well, to paraphrase a famous quotation, well, they would say that, wouldn't they? They're negotiating. Yes, they're not going to, when we put papers in front of them, say, gosh, this is wonderful, thank you very much for making all these compromises. Let's accept that wholeheartedly and send you back to celebrate. They're bound to probe and see how far the Prime Minister is going to go. We've already compromised significantly. This is a good solution. It's a solution where the UK government have made a number of compromises.